The cruelest hierarchies are not written in law. They are written in where a person is permitted to sit. November had settled over Ashfordton Park like a judgment. The sky pressed low and pewter gray, and the wind off the moors drove itself under every door and through every gap in the old stone, finding the cold places in a house that had many of them. Ice crystalled along the inside edges of the nursery window panes by 5 in the morning, and the corridors between the upper floors and the kitchen smelled of damp wool and wood smoke, and something older, something that belonged to the house itself, as though the walls exhaled a private grief. Into this Wren Ashby arrived on a Tuesday, her trunk smaller than was strictly practical and her references immaculate, carrying with her 1 leather satchel, 3 winter dresses, and the particular species of composure that belongs only to women who have already lost everything once and survived it. She had been a gentleman's daughter. Past tense. Her father, Charles Ashby, had died 2 years ago in the spring, leaving behind a library worth considerably more than the estate, a stack of creditors who moved with astonishing speed, and a daughter who had been educated beyond her new station, with no means whatsoever of reverting to the old one. The house was gone in 6 weeks. The books went at auction in 8. By autumn of that first year, Wren had catalogued her assets with the same methodical precision her father had once applied to his botanical drawings. She had French, Latin, basic German, intermediate Italian, solid mathematics, a serviceable hand, and no illusions. She had placed herself through an agency in London and come north by coach, and she had not wept during the journey, not because she felt nothing, but because she had learned that feeling things and surviving them were sometimes activities that had to be scheduled separately. The Ashfordton household was managed by Lady Priscilla Vane, the Duke's late wife's elder sister, who had installed herself as its effective mistress in the 22 months since the Duchess had died. Lady Priscilla was 51, magnificently coiffed, and possessed of a social cruelty so refined it barely registered as cruelty at all. It registered as correction, as standards being kept, as the natural consequence of insufficiency. She met Wren in the front hall, looked at her for approximately 4 seconds, and delivered her verdict in the form of a household orientation that was really a very elegant and thorough establishment of rank. "Governesses take meals in the kitchen," Lady Priscilla said. "Mrs. Holt will show you the servant's schedule. You are not a servant, of course, but you are not family, and the dining room is for family and invited guests. The nursery is on the 3rd floor. The children rise at 7:30. You will have managed everything requiring noise before 9 in the evening. His Grace is rarely in residence, and when he is not to be disturbed. Is that clear?" "Entirely," Wren said. She was shown to the kitchen. She sat at the end of a long oak table, between the bread larder and the door that let in the cold, and she ate her meals there for 17 days. The cook was not unkind. The under-housemaid, a girl named Betsy, left extra bread near Wren's place without comment. But the chair was hard, and the light was poor, and from the kitchen Wren could hear, on the evenings when Lady Priscilla entertained, the sound of the dining room 2 floors up, crystal, and laughter, and the particular bright noise of people who believed themselves to be at the center of something. She did not resent it exactly. Resentment was a luxury. She catalogued it instead, the way she catalogued everything. And she went upstairs each morning to the nursery and she taught. The children were called Iris and Edmund. Iris was 9 and solemn and precise. Edmund was 6 and had recently determined that the most interesting aspect of any subject was its potential for mess. Iris had her mother's face, or so Wren deduced from the single portrait in the upstairs corridor. A fair, quiet woman painted in blue silk, watching something outside the canvas with an expression of private attention. Edmund had a gap in his front teeth and an enthusiasm for beetles that Wren recognized immediately as the naturalist temperament and encouraged accordingly. They had been, before the Duchess died, apparently quite well attended to. Since then, they had been managed rather than loved, which was not the same thing at all, and Wren could see the difference in Iris's too careful posture and Edmund's habit of asking the same small question twice, as though testing whether the answer would change. She did not let it. She answered Edmund the same way both times, and she watched Iris's shoulders come down a fraction each week, and she taught them French vocabulary and long division and the correct names of 12 British beetle species, and the 17 days passed, and then on a Thursday afternoon, in the 3rd week of November, the front doors opened, and Ashfurton Park changed. She heard it before she saw it. She was in the nursery, overseeing Iris's composition exercise, when the sound of hooves on gravel cut through the wind. Not one horse, but several. The particular rhythm of a traveling party arriving with purpose. Then the front doors, which were very heavy, and made a specific sound against their hinges, and then the voices of the entrance hall staff below. A sudden organized deference that filtered up 3 flights of stairs with remarkable clarity. Iris looked up from her page. "Father," she said. Simply that. Not excited, exactly. Something more careful than excited. Wren set down her pen and went to the window, and she saw him cross the gravel toward the door below. She caught only the breadth of his coat, the way he moved without breaking stride while 2 footmen adjusted to flank him, the dark hair pushed back by the wind. He did not look up. He did not look around. He walked as though the entire house had been expecting him, and he saw no reason to acknowledge the expectation. She heard Lady Priscilla's voice below, pitched to a particular bright register reserved for social necessity. She heard one reply, low, short, the syllables indistinct from this height, but the brevity of them perfectly clear. This, she understood, was Magnus Hale, the 5th Duke of Ashfurton. He came to the nursery that same evening. She had not expected it. Lady Priscilla had made the Duke's habits sound like weather, impersonal, irregular, not arranged for anyone's convenience. But at 6:30, while Wren was reading to Edmund from a natural history volume, and Iris was drawing at the far table, the door opened. He was larger than she had anticipated from the figure glimpsed through glass. That was the first and least useful thought she had. He filled the doorframe in the way that certain men do, not by being unnecessarily wide, but by being completely present. Every inch accounted for, nothing diminished by the domestic scale of the room. His cravat was not yet retied from travel. His jaw was unshaven. He looked like a man who had ridden 40 miles and found the next item on his schedule was this, and who had not rearranged his face to suggest otherwise. Edmund scrambled off the window seat. "Papa." The Duke looked at his son. Something moved across his face that did not quite become an expression. He set a hand briefly on Edmund's head. Iris closed her sketchbook and rose with the careful posture Wren had been watching soften for 17 days. It was entirely rigid again now. All of it returned in an instant, and Wren registered this with a precision she tucked away for later consideration. "Miss Ashby," the Duke said. He had read the name from some document. She had not introduced herself. His voice was exactly what the one syllable downstairs had promised. Low, deliberate, each word placed rather than offered. "Your Grace," she said. He looked at the room, at the books stacked at Edmund's end of the table, at the lamp she had moved for better light, at the beetle drawings she had pinned to the wall above the window, because Edmund had been enormously pleased with them, and she had seen no reason to discourage the pleasure. He looked at Iris. "You are well?" "Yes, Papa." He looked at Edmund. "And you are not destroying anything." "I destroyed a seed pod this morning," Edmund said, with complete earnestness. "Miss Ashby said it was excellent for botanical study." A pause. Did she? He did not look at Wren during this exchange. He did not look at Iris. He was reading Edmund's face, with the focused attention of a man trying to extract information from a limited source, and Wren understood in that moment that he was not cold with his children. He was unpracticed. He had been away, or working, or grieving, perhaps all 3, in the particular combination that makes a person technically present in their own life while operating at a slight remove from it. He left after 9 minutes. He said a total of perhaps 40 words. But at the door he paused and turned back, and he looked at Wren directly for what she estimated was the first real time. "You take meals in the kitchen," he said. It was not a question. "Lady Priscilla arranged it," she said, flatly, precisely, not a complaint. He looked at her for a moment longer. His expression gave nothing. Then he left. She thought nothing more of it. The next morning at 8:30, one of the footmen arrived in the nursery carrying a 3rd chair. He set it at the nursery table without comment or explanation. The table, which was sized for lessons and children, now had 3 places, Iris on the left, Edmund in the center, and a 3rd chair to the right, with a place setting that included a proper cup and the same breakfast that Wren had been eating in the kitchen. The footman left before she could ask him anything. Edmund said, "Is that for you?" "I believe so," Wren said. "Capital," said Edmund, and helped himself to toast. Iris watched her sit down with the careful attention of a child who is tracking something important and has not yet decided what it means. Wren did not make ceremony of it. She poured her tea and continued the morning as though nothing extraordinary had occurred, which required a certain degree of concentration. Because something extraordinary had occurred, she simply could not afford to let it rearrange her. Lady Priscilla arrived at 11. She appeared in the nursery doorway with the expression of a woman who has climbed 3 flights of stairs for a reason she finds beneath her. Her gaze moved to the third-place setting, which had not yet been cleared from breakfast, and she was quiet for a moment, in which Wren continued correcting Iris's French exercise with deliberate steadiness. "His Grace," Lady Priscilla said, "has some eccentric notions about the management of this household." "The Duke was kind," Wren said. "The Duke," Lady Priscilla said, "does not understand the staffing arrangements." "I am not staff," Wren said. She kept her voice flat, entirely without heat. "As you yourself noted on my first day." The silence that followed had edges. "You are not family either, Miss Ashby." "No," Wren agreed. "I am the woman teaching his children French and mathematics, and the correct names of beetles, and apparently he has decided that woman may eat at a table with windows. I would not presume to second-guess him." Lady Priscilla left. The lesson continued. That evening, Wren heard raised voices from the drawing room 2 floors down, Lady Priscilla's, which carried, and the Duke's, which she could not make out, but which was brief. The conversation lasted less than 4 minutes by the clock on the nursery mantelpiece. Then it was quiet. She did not sleep well that night, not because she was frightened, but because something had shifted, and she could not determine its full dimensions, and she had learned that unquantified shifts were the ones that caught you. The Duke came to the nursery again the following morning, and the morning after that, always before 9, always briefly, always at the moment when Edmund was in maximum chaos over something small, and Iris was attempting to maintain order through the application of enormous silent dignity. He watched his children with the expression of a man looking at something he had failed to properly account for, and Wren watched him watch them, and she taught through it, continuing whatever the lesson was without interruption, because the lessons mattered, and the children mattered, and she had learned by now that the surest way to serve people well was to treat the work as serious, even when everything else was turbulent. On the 4th morning, he stayed 20 minutes. He sat in the window seat, not her chair, not either of the children's chairs, the window seat, which was not quite a seat, and required him to fold himself considerably, and he watched Edmund attempt a long division problem with the beetle drawings as his primary distraction. "The answer is 43, Edmund said, with total confidence. "The answer is 47, Wren said. "The beetles distracted me. They are not going to help you at 43. She glanced up and found the Duke looking at her. Not at Edmund, at her. She held the look for exactly long enough to acknowledge it, and then returned to the ledger of Edmund's arithmetic errors, which she kept in a small notebook, because patterns mattered. He said, as he left, "You keep a record." "Of the errors," she said. "It's more useful than recording the correct answers. The right answers are already written in the books." He looked at the notebook in her hand. "What else do you keep records of?" "Attendance," she said. "Progress, the gap between what the children can do and what they are not yet being asked to try." She paused, then added, because it was true, and she saw no reason to withhold true things. "The gap is considerable in both cases." He was quiet for a moment. "My wife managed it." "I know," Wren said. "The portrait in the corridor, she is watching something in it that isn't the painter. Someone who understood how to look at things was sitting for that." She had not meant to say quite that much. But he did not appear discomfited. He appeared, if anything, very slightly less like a man operating at a remove. 47, Edmund said, with great satisfaction, from the table. "You checked," Wren said. "The beetles helped after all." The Duke left, but he was not quite expressionless when he did. December arrived, and with it a particular quality of cold that was no longer November's damp grayness, but something cleaner and more absolute. The moors went white. The roads iced over. Ashfordton Park sealed itself against the weather, and within those walls the atmosphere underwent its own shift, gradual and unmistakable. The Duke was in residence, and the house was no longer managed by Lady Priscilla's elegant authority in all things. Wren noticed it in the small mechanics of her day. The breakfast chair had not gone away. The nursery fire was now kept properly stocked, rather than merely adequate. Mrs. Holt began consulting Wren about the children's schedules in a way that included rather than routed around her. These were not large things. They were the adjustment of small gears, and she tracked them with her usual precision and refused to weight them with more significance than they warranted. What she could not so easily categorize was the Duke himself. He had begun, in the second week of December, to stay longer in the mornings. Not substantially longer. He was a man with a dukedom to manage, and correspondence that arrived in quantities that the study table was not quite sufficient for, but longer. He asked questions about the lessons. He asked questions about Edmund's beetles, and about the French text Iris was working through, and once, obliquely, about Wren's own education. "Your father was a naturalist," he said. "A botanist," she said, "and a reader of everything else. You were educated with his library." And without much formal structure, which is why I believe in formal structure, the library was extraordinary, and the lack of sequence in it cost me 3 years of remedial mathematics, at an age when remedial mathematics is extremely humiliating. Something in his expression shifted. Not a smile. He was not a man who moved quickly toward smiles, but something adjacent to one, a slight reduction of the distance. "What happened to the library?" "Auction," she said, "in the second month after he died." He did not offer condolences. She was grateful. Condolences at this distance were social placeholders, and she had no use for them. What he offered instead was a silence that felt like acknowledgement, which was considerably more useful. Then, on the 17th of December, Lady Priscilla made her move. Wren had been aware that something was building. The signs had been there in the same way that household signs always are, the particular careful way that Lady Priscilla's social calls to the Duke had begun to run longer. The guests who had arrived the previous weekend, and who were collectively the kind of guests designed to demonstrate a specific proposition. The proposition was that Lady Priscilla Vane was the appropriate social manager of Ashfurton Park, that she knew these people and these people knew her, and that the house functioned better under her warm and vigorous authority than it would under any other arrangement. The 17th was a Thursday, and it brought a letter. Wren saw it because the footman who delivered it misread the instruction and brought it to the nursery rather than the study. It was from the agency in London, and Lady Priscilla had apparently written to them. The letter was not addressed to Wren. She would not have opened it. But the footman, young and flustered, had opened it by mistake, and the contents were entirely legible when he held it out to her with an expression of profound apology. It said, in brief, that Miss Wren Ashby's references had been reviewed and found, on re-examination, to contain certain inconsistencies that the agency felt obligated to bring to the attention of the household. It used careful language. The careful language amounted to, her credentials were being questioned, and her position was therefore precarious. Wren read it twice. She handed it back to the footman and told him to deliver it to the study as originally intended. She sat for a moment at the nursery table. The beetle drawings were above the window. Iris and Edmund were at their midday meal, overseen by Betsy. The fire was stacked properly, as it had been for 3 weeks. She thought about her father's library, sold in 8 weeks, about the house, sold in 6, about the way that the absence of resources makes a person available to any assertion about their worth, and how the only protection against that is to have been worth something in a way that cannot be auctioned. Then she went to the study and knocked. "Come," said the Duke. He had the letter in his hand when she entered. He had read it. She could see that he had read it twice, the same way she had, because the crease of it was slightly different than it would be from one reading. She did not wait for him to speak. "My references are immaculate," she said. "I have 3 from former employers, 1 from my father's solicitor, and 1 from the rector of our parish in Derbyshire, who knew my father for 20 years and has known me since I was 7. If you would like to write to any of them, I will provide the addresses. Lady Priscilla wrote to the agency without your knowledge or your authorization, and she asked them to review my credentials with a specific intention, which was not accuracy." He set the letter down. "You read it." The footman opened it in error. "I did not." A pause. I read it when he was holding it open in front of me. That is not the same thing. He looked at her. His expression was the one she had begun to read fairly accurately over 3 weeks of careful observation. Controlled, attending, taking the measure of something. Are there inconsistencies in your references? He said. No. Then there are none, he said. She stood still for a moment. She had been braced for more, for scrutiny, for process, for the particular institutional delay that tends to fall between a woman's assertion and the world's acceptance of it. He picked up his pen. I'll write to the agency myself. And Lady Priscilla? She said, not with heat, flatly, precisely, because it was the relevant question. He looked at her again. The look lasted longer than usual. Leave Lady Priscilla to me, he said. She left. She went back up 3 flights of stairs to the nursery, and she sat at the chair that had been put there for her, and she permitted herself approximately 90 seconds of something that was not quite shaking, but occupied the same neighborhood, and then she took out her record book and wrote the day's arithmetic notes, because the work was the thing, and the work remained. What happened next was not immediate. It happened over 2 days, and it was not violent or dramatic in the external sense. The Duke wrote to the agency. He also wrote, Wren later gathered from Mrs. Holt's carefully imprecise comments, to the family solicitor in London, and on the morning of the 19th of December, he had a conversation with Lady Priscilla in the drawing room that lasted 40 minutes, and was conducted at a volume that was entirely controlled, no raised voices, and that ended with Lady Priscilla's personal maid spending the remainder of the morning moving luggage. Lady Priscilla appeared at the nursery door that afternoon. She looked at Wren with an expression that had resolved itself from its various ornate components into something simpler and less finished. I hope, she said, with great precision, that you understand what has been done here on your behalf. I understand, Wren said. What has been done on behalf of accurate information? That is not the same thing. Lady Priscilla left Ashfordton Park the following morning. December passed in a new quiet. Wren taught the children French and mathematics and, now, the basics of botanical drawing, for which Iris had demonstrated a genuine and unsentimental gift. Edmund added 2 new species to his beetle catalogue and wrote their names in Latin with only moderate assistance. The fire in the nursery stayed properly stacked. Wren ate breakfast at the nursery table, and on 3 occasions the Duke also ate breakfast at the nursery table, in the window seat with a cup of coffee and the morning's correspondence, while Edmund told him about beetles, and Iris showed him the botanical drawings, and Wren taught through it, as she always had, because the work was serious. She did not know what to do with him. That was the truth of it. He had moved from abstraction to presence over the course of 6 weeks, and she had no framework for what he had become, because the frameworks she possessed were for employers and tormentors, and the category he occupied now fit neither. He was not rescuing her, exactly. She had defended herself. The facts had done the rest. He had simply declined to disbelieve her, which in her experience was rarer than rescuing and considerably more useful. She thought about this, with the methodical attention she brought to things that resisted easy categorization. On the 24th of December, while she was helping Edmund wrap a small parcel, a beetle drawing, framed with the help of the under-footman, for Iris. Miss Ashby, Edmund said, with the tone of a child who has assembled a difficult question for some time. Are you going to stay? She looked at the parcel. I hope so. Papa said so too, Edmund said. She looked up. When did your father say so? This morning, Edmund said, with the absolute unconcerned authority of a 6-year-old. He said it to Mrs. Holt. He said Miss Ashby is staying, and her rooms are to be moved to the East Corridor before January. She sat with that for a moment. The East Corridor was not the servants' corridor. The East Corridor had windows that faced the moor. She said, Finish wrapping the parcel, please. You've gone pink, Edmund observed. I am cold, Wren said. She was not cold. He found her that evening in the corridor near the portrait of his late wife, which she had stopped at on her way to the nursery to check the fire before bed. She often stopped there. The Duchess was watching something outside the frame with that private, attentive expression, and Wren found it steadying, in the way that evidence of careful observation in someone else is always steadying. She heard him behind her before she turned. You're going pink again, he said. She turned. He was closer than she had anticipated. The corridor was not especially wide, and he occupied it the way he occupied rooms, completely, without apparent effort. "Edmund informed me about the East Corridor," she said. "I see. He also told me you said I was staying." "Yes," he said. She looked at him. The corridor was lit by 2 lamps, and they made everything the color of old amber, and she thought with detached and inconvenient clarity that she had been looking at this man for 6 weeks, with the attention she brought to ledgers and botanical error records, and all the things that required careful watching, and she had not managed to be less interested in what she saw. This was not particularly convenient. "You don't owe me anything," she said. "I want to be clear about that. Lady Priscilla's letter was addressed to a problem you didn't create, and the resolution of it was, 'I'm aware of what I owe and don't owe,'" he said. "I am attempting," she said, "to establish that if you have kept me on out of a sense of obligation." Wren. It was the first time he had used her name, not Miss Ashby. Her name. She stopped. He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the portrait. His expression, which she could usually read now with moderate accuracy, had moved somewhere she hadn't charted before. Open was not quite the right word, but less defended, less at a remove. "I come to the nursery every morning," he said, "because Iris has stopped holding her breath, and Edmund calls his beetles by proper Latin names, and still gets distracted by them, and I can see what my children are when someone is paying them the correct kind of attention." A pause. "And because there is a person at that table who tells me the truth with the same tone she uses for long division, and I have not encountered that in this house in 2 years." She said nothing for a moment. The amber light moved slightly as a draft passed through the corridor. "I keep records," she said finally, "because patterns matter, and because what something has been tells you a great deal about what it might become." She held his gaze. "That is what I believe about people as well, not only arithmetic." "Then you have been keeping a record of me," he said. "Yes," she said. "You stayed 9 minutes the first evening. By the 4th week you were staying 40. You fold yourself into the window seat rather than taking any of the chairs, which I believe is because you are not sure you are entitled to them yet." She paused. "You are entitled to them." Something in his face completed a movement that had been traveling across it for several weeks. It arrived at something that was not quite a smile, but was its closest neighbor yet. "The East Corridor," he said, "is where my wife's sitting room was. No one has used it in 2 years. It has good light. I thought—" He paused. A man placing words rather than offering them. "I thought someone who keeps records deserved a room with adequate light for it." She considered this. She thought about the kitchen table and the bread larder and the drafts, and about Iris's shoulders and Edmund's twice-asked questions, and about the portrait on the wall beside them and the woman in it who had known how to look at things. She thought about what her father had said once, at the end of a long evening with a difficult text. The best arrangements are the ones where both parties come out knowing something they didn't know when they sat down. "I would accept the East Corridor," she said, "on the understanding that I am the children's governess and their teacher and a person of professional standing in this house, not a charity case installed in a good room to soften an obligation." "I am not a man who softens obligations," he said. "No," she agreed. "You are a man who pays them exactly and in full, which is considerably preferable." He looked at her. She looked at him. The lamps made everything amber. "I am also," he said, more quietly, "a man who has not spoken to anyone in 2 years, the way I have spoken to you in 6 weeks. She let that sit where it was. She did not rush toward it, or away from it. She had learned, over the course of a difficult 2 years, that true things did not require immediate response. They required careful attention, the same kind you gave to a pattern in an error record, or a gap between what a child could do and what they were not yet being asked to try. "Then we are at a beginning," she said, "not an ending." He held her gaze for a moment longer. Then, very deliberately, he extended his hand. Not a social gesture, something more precise than that, an offering of evidence, of intention, of the kind of commitment that a man makes when he has decided to stop operating at a remove. She took his hand. His was warm. The corridor was cold. The amber lamps wavered. "Beginning," he said. Simply that. The days that followed were December's last, and they were unlike any days she had spent in the preceding 2 years. She moved to the east corridor. The rooms had good light, as promised, windows that faced the moor, and in the mornings the frost on them caught the early sun and scattered it in a way that was not practical and entirely beautiful. She set her record books on the desk there, and her father's one remaining volume, a small plant taxonomy that had been in her coat pocket the day the library was sold, and she looked at it all arranged on the good desk in the good light, and she permitted herself to feel something she had not felt in a long time, which was that the arrangement of things might, over time, make sense. Iris showed her the botanical drawings at Christmas. Edmund gave everyone present a written catalogue of his 12 beetle species, including a dedication to Miss Wren Ashby, scientific collaborator, which made Betsy the housemaid make a small sound and look at the ceiling. Magnus. She thought of him as Magnus now, privately, in the east corridor in the mornings, sat in the window seat again rather than the proper chair, and she was about to say something about the chair, and he caught her expression and moved to the chair without a word, and she felt something clarify, finally, fully, like an equation that had been working itself out across a ledger for 6 weeks and had arrived at its proper answer. He proposed on a Thursday, not theatrically. He came to the east corridor in the morning with a small carved wooden box that had belonged to his mother, and he put it on her record book desk, and he said, "I am asking you to consider a permanent arrangement, in full knowledge that you are not the grateful kind, and that I am not the patient kind, and that neither of these things appears to have been an obstacle so far." She opened the box. The ring inside was plain gold, with a sapphire, dark blue, the color of a morning sky before the sun had fully made up its mind. "I will consider it," she said, "on the understanding that I intend to continue teaching Iris and Edmund, whether or not I accept, because I have plans for Iris that include a proper botanical education, and Edmund is not going to stop at 12 beetles if I have any say in it." "You have every say in it," he said, "and I want the east corridor desk regardless." "Wren," he said, with the ghost of the thing that was not quite a smile, "you have already rearranged half this house. You can have the desk." She looked at the sapphire. She thought about the kitchen table and the hard chair and the bread larder draft. She thought about the chair he had carried up 3 flights of stairs by proxy, because a person who kept records of what mattered deserved a place at the table. She thought about her father's phrase, "The best arrangements are the ones where both parties come out knowing something they didn't know when they sat down." She looked up at Magnus. "Yes," she said, "a beginning." He put the ring on her hand. It was exactly the right size. She thought briefly that this was the kind of detail she would have put in the record book, and then she thought that some things did not need to be recorded because they were already written somewhere more permanent, in the way a room rearranges itself around 2 people who have finally, precisely, decided to account for each other. Perhaps you have known what it is to eat alone at the edge of things, to carry your competence in both hands through a door that was not opened for you. Perhaps you have sat at a hard chair in a cold kitchen and heard the sound of warmth 2 floors above you and catalogued it rather than grieved it, because cataloging was how you survived. If you have, then you know that what Wren found at Ashfurton Park was not rescue, not in the way the word is usually meant. It was something more exact and more durable. It was the recognition that the records she kept were worth keeping, that the gaps she identified were worth measuring, that the work she treated as serious was serious, and that the person beside her had understood this from the moment he folded himself into a window seat, rather than presume to a chair he had not yet earned. That is not rescue. That is partnership, and it is, in the end, the only arrangement worth having.